moments in life that quietly or suddenly change everything. A diagnosis, a loss, a decision you didn't expect to make. And once that moment happens, the real question becomes, then what? Welcome to Change Happened, Then What? A storytelling podcast about the moments that shape us and the lives we build after them. Each episode brings you a real story told with honesty and care, where everything was questioned and where even then they chose to keep moving forward. This isn't an interview show. It's a place for real stories shared thoughtfully, sometimes messy, sometimes hopeful, but always human. I'm your host, Heather Holt, and I'm so glad you're here. Before we begin, I want to invite you into something I'm doing called the Changed Me Community Drawing. Stay tuned to the end of the episode to find out how you can enter into our monthly drawing for a super cozy Change Happened trucker hat or a super soft tee. Now, let's dive in. What happens when you think you have your entire life mapped out? You know who you are. You know who you're going to become. And all that's left to do is get there. But life doesn't always follow the plans we make. Sometimes it only takes a single moment to change everything. In today's story, we're going to hear how one ordinary trip to the airport to visit his parents turned one man's entire world upside down. Andrew Davie thought he knew the path ahead, but in a single moment, everything changed. And what followed wasn't just a journey of physical healing. It became something deeper, a journey of emotional healing, resilience, and rediscovering who you are when the life you planned suddenly disappears. Now, let's dive into Andrew's story.
I grew up in New York City, and I went to school on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. When I graduated in 1996, I went to Tulane University, where I became a theater major, which was sort of my first willingness to pursue the arts. I had a very supportive family. It was the first time I'd ever heard somebody not being advised to go into the business school, but to pursue something that they were passionate about. So I graduated with a bachelor's in theater. And I moved back to New York City under the naive assumption that I would be able to get a writing position. I was sort of like the grasshopper in the fable about the grasshopper and the ant.
Andrew attended Tulane University, a school known not only for its academics, but for its deep connection to the arts and culture of the city around it. Tulane's theater and art programs encourage students to explore storytelling from every angle: performance, writing, and creative expression, all in a place where music, literature, and creativity seem to live in the very air. For Andrew, it was the perfect place to study theater and writing. He earned his bachelor's degree there, surrounded by the kind of creative energy that makes big dreams feel possible. And when graduation came, he did what many young artists do. He stepped out into the world determined to become a writer. At that point in his life, Andrew describes himself as being a little bit like the grasshopper in the old fable, The Ant and the Grasshopper. If you're unfamiliar with that fable, the grasshopper spends his days playing music and enjoying life, while the ant quietly prepares for the future. While Andrew was enjoying life, many of the friends around him were preparing for it. He believed that if he followed creativity wherever it led, the path would eventually reveal itself. At the time, Andrew believed life was something you could shape with enough determination. What he didn't know yet was that life sometimes reshapes you instead.
I did know that I wanted to be a writer, but that was still a very much an abstract thought. So I got a series of jobs to pay the bills. I worked as a recruiter for a little while. I worked as an office manager for a theater company. I worked in finance. And then in 2008, while I was still working in finance, the subprime mortgage crisis happened, which changed the landscape of the business world. And that was sort of the first time that happened, but it wouldn't be the last time in my life that I would have to make a change based on what was happening in the world.
I think most of us remember the subprime mortgage crisis, but if it's been a while since you thought about it, here's a quick reminder. In the early 2000s, banks began offering risky home loans to borrowers who often couldn't afford them. These were called subprime mortgages. When housing prices started to fall, millions of homeowners could no longer make their payments. The financial system built around those loans began to collapse. By 2008, the crisis had triggered a global financial meltdown. Banks failed, major companies folded, and millions of people lost jobs almost overnight. Andrew happened to be working in finance right in the middle of it. So, like many people during that time, he suddenly found himself facing a question he hadn't planned for. What now? So he did something that would shape the next chapter of his life. He decided to go back to school. Andrew was accepted into graduate school at Adelphi University, a private university on Long Island, known for its strong programs in the humanities, education, and creative writing. There, Andrew returned to what had always been calling him from the beginning: storytelling, writing, and the quiet work of shaping ideas into words.
So most graduate schools for writing are subsidized, so they're free. Mine was not, so they gave us the opportunity to teach undergraduate classes. So I got to teach creative writing to freshmen, sophomores while I was in graduate school. And while I was teaching, that sort of became something that I thought, oh, well, if I don't become a full-time author, I could be a teacher, because I really enjoyed what I was doing. So when I graduated in 2012, I figured that I would probably become a teacher for the rest of my life. And I had this thought that one day I would be retiring when I was in my 60s, and I would have, taught at the same school for the last 30 years. And I was sort of thinking now would be the time to do something really courageous and, take a risk.
While Andrew was working on his master's degree in creative writing, he discovered something he hadn't expected. He enjoyed teaching. Standing in front of a classroom, talking about stories, language, and ideas, helping students find their own voice. It felt meaningful. But at the same time, he also felt something else. A quiet voice telling him that he wasn't ready to settle into one path for the rest of his life. Andrew realized he didn't want to wake up one day and feel like the ground beneath his life had quietly shifted while he wasn't paying attention. So, he decided to do something courageous. After learning from a Ukraine poet who had visited his school through the Fulbright program, Andrew thought that sounded like something he could do too. So, he applied. Every year, thousands of people apply. Only a small percentage are selected. And he was one of them. The opportunity took him halfway across the world to Macau, where he had been accepted to a teaching position. For a year, Andrew lived and taught there, experiencing a culture and a part of the world completely different from anything he had known before. And something about it felt right. So when the first year came to an end, and Andrew wasn't ready to leave, he decided to stay in Asia a little longer and found another teaching opportunity, this time in Hong Kong. A new city, a new chapter, and after 2 years in Asia, Andrew finally returned home to the States. We'll be right back after this message. Today's Change Happen story is sponsored by Pure Energy Apothecary. Owner Don Lancaster and I are friends, and honestly, that matters. It's how I know how much care goes into what she makes. Dawn doesn't create products just to sell them. She makes them because she uses them and cares about how they support real people like you. Her magnesium butter has become a staple in my daily life when my muscles feel tired, when my legs won't settle at night, or when my nervous system feels like it's been running on overdrive, which, let's be honest, a lot of us can relate to. Magnesium supports muscle relaxation, helps with sleep, and eases that wired but tired feeling. This butter is creamy and absorbs right into the skin. No heaviness, no overpowering scent, just comfort. For me, it's not just relief. It's a small ritual that tells my body it's safe to slow down. If you're craving that kind of support, visit pureenergyvt.com and use code PURECHANGE to get your 20% off. Now back to Andrew's story.
And then I moved back to the United States. I had been in a relationship with someone while I was in Macau. So we spent my year in Hong Kong and her year in DC in a long distance relationship. And I had assumed that when I moved back, she and I would rekindle our relationship and move in together. And that would be the start of our lives. And she broke up with me the month before I was supposed to move back. But I had already gotten a job teaching middle school in Alexandria, Virginia. And I'd already looked at apartments. So that was another curveball that I needed to adjust to.
And just like that, another curveball. But by now, Andrew has learned something very important about life. When things don't go the way you planned, you adjust. His brother was living nearby, which meant family was close. So Andrew did what many of us try to do when life hands us a few lemons. He decided to make some lemonade. During that time, Andrew returned to teaching middle and high school students. But quietly in the background, Andrew had been working on something else, a side project, a crime fiction novel. Writing had always been the thread running through his life, and now that book was finally getting ready to be released. Once again, he pivoted, this time deciding that maybe it was time to take his writing even further. Andrew began making plans to pursue a PhD in writing. What Andrew didn't know yet was that another moment was coming, one that would change everything.
And then my first crime fiction book was going to be published by a small press. So I was really excited because I had assumed that that would be the major revelatory moment of my life that I had been working towards. Now I'm finally going to be a published author, and that would open all the doors and allow me to sort of realize my full potential. So as a result of that, I decided not to renew my teaching contract. So on June 29th of 2018, the week after I turned 40, I was going to go visit my parents in South Carolina. My brother and his family were already down there, and that was going to sort of be the start of my summer break after finishing teaching high school and having my book come out. It was going to come out in 2019, so it was sort of like a brave new world. When I got to the gate, I felt fine, but I suddenly began to sweat uncontrollably. I have never run a marathon, but I would imagine it was the amount of sweat that a person who had just finished a marathon would have. It just didn't make sense. But at the time I thought, okay, maybe I'm coming down with a flu or there's something. This is before COVID, so that was my first thought. And then I remember they called my group to board, and I went to lift my backpack, and it felt like I had cinder blocks in there. At the time, I thought, okay, I'm getting sick. If I can get on the plane, I'll take a nap, and hopefully I'll feel better when I land. And then I tried to walk to the gate to scan my ticket, and the floor started to shift. And it was like being at a funhouse at a carnival. And I wasn't thinking clearly still, because I remember thinking this is going to make it more difficult to get on the plane. Floors aren't supposed to move. So I took a step and I fell on the ground. And I remember hearing somebody say, "Don't move. So first responders put a neck brace on, And I remember the last thing I said was, I can't miss my flight, because all I could think about was how worried my mother would be that I wasn't able to get on the plane. And then I heard someone laugh and say,
You can catch another flight.
And then I passed out. And that's the last memory I have.
There are a few moments in life when your body tries to tell you something is very, very wrong. But at the time, you don't quite understand what it's trying to say. Note to self, floors are not supposed to move. And if you suddenly start sweating like you just ran a marathon, there's a good chance you're not coming down with a cold. Right there, next to the jetway, just moments before boarding the plane, Andrew's world went dark. He was rushed to George Washington University Hospital, where doctors initially believed he may have simply tripped, fallen, and knocked himself unconscious. But something didn't quite add up. What they found changed everything. Andrew had suffered a ruptured brain aneurysm, causing what doctors call a subarachnoid hemorrhage, bleeding in the space surrounding the brain. Without immediate treatment, it can rapidly be fatal. Within hours, doctors were preparing Andrew for emergency surgery, a surgery that would ultimately save his life.
And I think my brother had to then explain to my parents what had happened and that it was sort of touch and go, because what I'd had was certainly potentially fatal, but then they also said we've managed to kind of take care of this and he should be okay unless there's a second bleed, which I found out later that there was. I think there was sort of a moment. I remember hearing that my father was on the porch when my brother told him that I might not make it, and he screamed loud enough to frighten my mother, who was inside the house.
No!
Very quickly, everyone sort of dropped what they were doing. So they were all there. I was in intensive care for about 3 weeks. They needed to monitor me for something called vasospasms.
Even after surgery, the danger wasn't over. Doctors monitored something called vasospasms, where blood vessels near the brain constrict after bleeding. If those vessels tighten too much, they can cut off blood flow and cause a stroke. So for days, doctors and nurses watched closely, because surviving the rupture was only the first step. The brain is still fragile, still vulnerable. Eventually, Andrew stabilizes and was moved out of the ICU. Those days in the hospital were memorable, although not for Andrew, because he hadn't regained those memories yet.
So I was alert and I was up, but I have no memory of it. Fortunately, my mother kept a journal and I have emails that she wrote. I sort of have a pretty good idea. I, for some reason, told everybody who talked to me that I had lived in Australia and worked in Australia, which is not true. I don't know how I came up with that. My parents needed to access my laptop, so they kept asking me for my password, and I would be on the verge of giving it to them, and then I would change my mind and lecture them about the importance of keeping passwords secure. At one point, I think I told my family that we had to leave the hospital because an assassin was going to come kill everyone. Quick-witted mother said,
I just spoke to the assassin on the phone, and don't worry, I canceled the hit.
So intensive care for about 3 weeks, and then I remembered regaining cognizance when I was in rehab. That was about 10 days, and I don't think I had fully processed what had happened. I think I was still sort of at the beginning of just accepting that something monumental had happened, but I couldn't quite wrap my head around the size of it. And then after about 10 days, I was discharged and I went home, and my father returned back to his house. My mother stayed with me in my apartment, and she would take me to my outpatient therapy. I had double vision, so I wore an eye patch. I moved very slowly. I needed a cane to walk. I remember wanting to eat some mint chocolate chip ice cream and it tasting like pennies. But I hadn't quite figured out the emotional recovery still hadn't begun yet. It was mostly just following directions.
When Andrew was finally released from the hospital, that's where the real work began. His mother stayed with him to help care for him. Recovery became his full-time job. For nearly 6 months, his days were filled with therapy, exercises, and the slow, determined work of rebuilding his body. Physically, he was healing, but emotionally, that was a different story. He tried returning to substitute teacher, tried dating again, which raised a question most people never expect to ask on a first date. When exactly do you bring up the fact that you had a brain aneurysm? Before we continue, I want to share something close to my heart. Dear Sweet One Lullabies. It's a custom lullaby made just for your child. Using their name, birth date, and whether they were born under the sun or moon, each story becomes a gentle audio keepsake filled with warmth and wonder, perfect for bedtime or just because. You can find Dear Sweet One on Etsy or at changehappenedpodcast.com. Now back to Andrew's story.
Do you tell your date that you've had a ruptured brain aneurysm? And if you do, when do you bring that up? Do you suggest, hey, would you like to split an order of nachos? By the way, do you know what a subarachnoid hemorrhage is? Because most of it felt like I was trying to force something that used to fit but no longer fit. I think I had the image in my mind that when I came back to my apartment in December of 2018, it would be like putting on an old jacket that still fit. And I ended up eventually applying for and getting a job as a tutor that was going to start in April of 2020.
By this point, Andrew was nearly 2 years into recovery. Physically, he felt okay, but internally, things still didn't quite make sense. Then, in April of 2020, Andrew landed a tutoring job. And if that date rings a bell for you, you probably know what comes next. Because just as Andrew was starting to rebuild his life again, the entire world was about to change. A global pandemic was arriving.
As a result of that, I moved back in with my parents, and I was with them for probably about a year and a half. And that turned out to be a really wonderful silver lining because I could just focus on healing emotionally and sort of reconciling what changes would have to happen. And while I was with my parents during COVID, I realized that teaching wasn't going to be the calling that it had been at one point. Also, my book came out and nothing changed in terms of all the doors that I thought would be open or, potentially being a guest on Conan O'Brien.
Andrew moved back in with his parents and began focusing on something he hadn't fully addressed yet, healing emotionally. And oddly enough, the pandemic created a kind of silver lining for him. The world slowed down, and Andrew began asking himself an important question. What actually makes me happy now? Not the life I had before, but the life that fits the person he had become. That path eventually led him to counseling, helping people navigate difficult transitions, something he now understood deeply.
So I was able to decide the few times that I'd really felt good about myself or less alone were when I'd talked to other people who'd survived or been recovering from brain injuries, and they could confirm that what I'd been feeling wasn't unique to me. So I thought if I could do that for other people, then that would really be fulfilling. I applied to graduate school again, this time for counseling, and got a degree in clinical mental health counseling. And then sometime around 2022, my mother was officially diagnosed with ALS, and I ended up staying there and being her full-time caregiver for the next year and a half. And that turned out to be, originally I think I had thought that writing a book and getting published or being in a romantic relationship with someone or having kids or getting married would be the fulfilling thing that allowed me to realize the joy and happiness I'd been searching for. And it turned out that taking care of my mother was that thing. She passed in September of 2024. I was able to provide a certain quality of life for my mother that probably she wouldn't have had I not been there. and I was still able to get the hours I needed to become provisionally licensed as a counselor.
There's something powerful about the roles reversing in life. The person who once cared for you becomes the person you care for now. Andrew is also an incredibly prolific writer. Across fiction and nonfiction, his work explores identity, justice, morality, and the complicated nature of human behavior. Storytelling has always been a part of Andrew's DNA, and I suspect it always will be. You can find links to his books and website in the show notes and on Season 2 guests page at changehappenedpodcast.com. So, as our conversation wrapped up, I asked Andrew what makes him smile today.
I have a really wonderful friend, and she and I usually talk every day. We do virtual coffee in the morning. That makes me smile.
Virtual coffee with a friend every morning. And what Andrew is really describing there is connection. Realizing you're not alone. That happiness sometimes shows up in smaller moments than what we expected. I asked Andrew, what words of wisdom would he give to you today? And this is what he says.
Rather than try to bend something to your will, try to see if you can align yourself with how things are.
That's a pretty profound thought, because when you look at Andrew's story, the plans he had, the life he thought he was building, the rupture that changed everything, you realize the real work wasn't just healing his body. It was learning how to live inside a completely new version of his life. Andrew told me he's finally reached a place where he feels truly grateful, and maybe that's the piece I'll leave you with today. Gratitude. Not for the life you thought you were supposed to have, but for the life that's actually in front of you. Because sometimes the story we never planned is the one that teaches us the most. Andrew once had his entire life mapped out, but what he discovered is that sometimes the map disappears. So, you can learn to navigate by something deeper. And now for the What Changed Me community drawing information. Head to changehappenedpodcast.com. Click on the What Changed Me banner to tell us what stayed with you from today's episode or any interview episode you listen to as part of the What Changed Me community drawing. Each time you share, you'll be entered into a Change Happened drawing. You can enter more than once. Every entry is also automatically included into our quarterly drawing for a special Change Happened Super Prize, whether you've won before or not. Change doesn't end the story. It's often where the next chapter begins. If something in today's episode stayed with you, a moment, a sentence, a feeling, I'd love to hear about it. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. Because these stories don't end where the episode does. They keep moving forward in what we carry with us and in who we pass them on to. Is written, edited, and produced by me, Heather Holt, with the loyal background support from my two sidekicks, Waylon and Dalton. Until next time, keep smiling, and maybe let your dog inspire your next big idea.
There's always a reason to always choose joy. There's something deeper that the world can't destroy. Smile when you think you can't. Smile, get up and dance. Smile, there's a bigger plan. The storm only lasts for a while. So smile.